Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers monthly webinar. This will be the first of two webinars that we'll be having for the month of October. My name is Vincent Jones, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon session. This is a CPD event, that is, it is a continuous professional development event. It carries a value of 2 CPD points. Please contact our secretariat to have your CPD information forwarded to you should you wish to claim these points for your professional organization. A bit of housekeeping. Please note that these sessions run as follows. We introduce our presenter, who will present for between 30 and 40 minutes. We then will have an open session to our general audience to ask questions and interact with our guests. This is done either by raising your hand, at which time the moderator will acknowledge you and invite you to ask your question. Alternatively, you can post your question in the chat. The moderator will answer the question on your behalf. We ask that you please mute your electronic devices until you're asked a question. Tonight's topic is BAPE after 60 years, a SWOT analysis, and it will be delivered by engineering fellow Andrew Hutchinson. Andrew has a very long affiliation with the Association of Professional Engineers here in Barbados, and he is one of our fellows. He has served in myriad capacities, both at the BAPE Engineers Registration Board, and he's an engineer in practice for over 40 years. I think most practicing engineers in Barbados do know Andrew Hutchinson, or at least know of his work and his body of work, particularly as it pertains to the areas of hydrology and design in and around water, basically, of which he's a specialist. We also do have this afternoon, who will be, I'm sure, adding to Andrew's comments once he's finished his presentation, engineering fellow Tony Gibbs. And two of these distinguished gentlemen are, I would say, two of the more distinguished of our members, and have really distinguished themselves in engineering in Barbados. So we do look forward to hearing Andrew's reflection of the last 60 years. And then we do look forward to an interesting interaction in terms of conversation and questions at the end of the presentation. Andrew, without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to you now, sir.
Okay, thanks, Vincent. I'll just share my screen. I hope everybody can see it.
Yes, Andrew, we can see.
Right. Okay. So what we're going to talk about this afternoon, I'll give you a brief welcome, and then I have a definition of engineering I'd like to share with you. And then we talk about, in the beginning, the early years. Give a bit of my recollection of the early years. And then I've done a SWOT analysis of the association's operation. And, you know, most of you know what a SWOT analysis is: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I briefly touch on the future, and then there's some questions I'm throwing to the floor. So I just welcome everybody this afternoon to this session. I have to extend congratulations to BAPE for weathering the storm over 60 years. 60 years is quite a journey. And it's good to see the association has held it together for that period, and I wish you can continue for much longer. So I go straight into my next slide. Engineering. Now I can't recall. I'm not the author of this. I found it somewhere, but I don't recall who is the author. But I use this definition all the time, and all of my staff in the office, I make sure that this is pinned on their board in front of them so that they can, you know, memorize and visualize this daily. And I'll read it briefly. Engineering is the engineer's use of their knowledge of mathematics and natural sciences to develop ways to economically utilize with judgment the materials and forces of nature for the benefit of civilization. For the time I saw this definition, I could not think of a more appropriate definition of engineering and what engineers do. The emphasis is on the maths and sciences, and your designs must be economical, and it requires judgment. It's not just a math calculation, so that the materials and forces of nature are harnessed for the benefit of civilization. So I just thought I would share that with you, and maybe BAP could have somewhere on their website where the to set it up as for members to look at it. Now, in the beginning, I'm not sure the cross section of the audience we have tonight, but the first meeting of BAP was held in the conceptual meeting was held on the 2nd of October 1964 at the drill hall in the garrison, and then the first AGM was on shortly after, November 19th. They were moving swiftly, and the first president elected was Sir Frank Hutchinson. There were 24 founding members, and I've listed all of their names here, just for to jog the memory of those newcomers who have just come around, who recently joined. Frere Gill, Gordon Crawford, Patrick Brown, Charles. The ones in red are the ones that I actually met and recall meeting in my time as a junior engineer when I joined. Charles Evelyn, Frank McConney, Philip Cheeseman, Terence Gill, John Nelson, Gordon Hayward, I think that's Maurice Rochford, Sir Frank Hudson, John Rowe, Edward Elliott, Keith Johnson, Herbert Nicky Seeley, Bertram Mahey, Charles Emtich, Oliver Mason, Albert Mall, and Lionel Williams. Quite a few of them, those engineers there were mechanical and electrical. John Nelson was connected with the Light and Power for many years. He was managing director, and Frank McConney succeeded him. And Charles Evelyn was around for quite a while. I think he was at BET. Sir Frank Hudson was a consultant to the sugar industry. This is a time when Barbados had 12, 15 factories. And the M. Simpsons and their team, of which Sir Frank was part of their team, provided mechanical consulting engineering services to the sugar factories. And of course, there's Nicky Seeley from the Water Authority, and then there's Keith Johnson, Water Authority, but then he went on to join CEP. Bert Mahey of Mahey, Chadton, Ridley, and Al Wason, etc. Yeah, so these were some of the early guys who were instrumental in forming the association 60 years ago. Now, I'll give a few recollection of my memories of the early years. Now, I remember Sir Frank Hudson well, because he was instrumental in me getting my first holiday job in 1970. I had just finished my first year, and my second year, and at UE, and I was trying to get a holiday job in a design office. So my dad, who was in the sugar industry, I mean, I'm a product of the sugar factory. I lived in a sugar factory most of my life. My dad was on the manager of the sugar factory. So he spoke to Sir Frank Hudson for some assistance, and Sir Frank quietly phoned Miles Rothwell, and bingo, I had a holiday job. It was quite quite a good piece of networking. And then I joined BAP in 1972 after graduation in 71. And I was elected what was then called a graduate observer for 1973-74. And I distinctly remember meetings being held up in Nicky Seeley's office at the Water Authority. This is the old Water Authority building, which is still there. And we all journeyed up to his office on the top floor to have the committee meetings. And I distinctly remember Nicky Seeley lecturing me on more than one occasion about the necessity to do it right the first time. Nicky said, look, as a developing country, we don't have money. We don't have the budget to make mistakes and do it twice. Make sure you get it right the first time. I always remember that. That was his mantra. But members of the committee at the time were Keith Johnson, Ambrose Johnson, Bruce Hackett, Burt Mahey. They're the ones I remember. There might have been others, but they're the ones I distinctly remember at the junior sitting in on the BAPE meeting in the early 70s. And then, of course, the collapsed tennis court stand. There was I think it was a Davis Cup tournament tennis match, and at that time it was held at the Garrison just in front of the main guard there, and they had set up these scaffold tube stand. The stand built with scaffold tubes to facilitate the people who would come to watch this tennis match, and it collapsed, and that triggered a lobby for the Engineers Registration Act of 1975. That, in my view, was a game changer. It was a game changer. I lost my slide here, coming back. Yeah, it was a game changer for the engineering profession in Barbados. These are just some of my, I don't want to dwell too much. I could wax for quite a while, but just give some of my recollection of the early years. There were, at that time, there were very few consultants in the island. I remember CEP, I remember around the 70s, Wallace Evans came in, and I eventually left Miles and went to work for them. Miles Rothwell Associates was, there were probably 3 or 4, maybe 4 consulting engineering firms in Barbados at the time. And, you know, but it was controlled by expats. They were not, there's really, apart from DM Simpsons, there's no really indigenous consulting firm. So let's start the SWOT analysis of the association. Strengths. Now, I think it is a strength that BAPE is a legal entity with a track record of 60 years. I consider that a strength. I also, the membership has increased from 24 to 150, although I think the 150 could be higher, but that's it's shown the growth in membership over the 60 years. A strength, a very big strength in my opinion, is when it first set up a secretariat in Christie Building. Now that was not the first secretariat. When I built my office building in Black Rock, that would have been, I moved in there in 1980. No, 84. Around 85, 86, I offered them BAPE to rent space on the ground floor, and they did. So BAPE for the first time had a meeting room with a board table and a couple of filing cabinets. And BAPE had a secretariat. It was not manned. There was nobody there, but BAPE had a meeting room there, which was then also used by the registration board. That was around 85, 86, just after I built the building. And then subsequently, the secretariat was moved to Christie Building. Everybody knows where that is, I think, opposite on Bay Street, opposite government headquarters, opposite Light and Power. And then we were sharing an office there with the architects and the registration board and so forth. And I think that was a step, because before, everybody, the secretary of the association had the cabinet home by him, and the cabinet kept moving around from house to house, and it was kind of clumsy. So I think establishing a secretariat was a serious giant leap. I think the BAPE has done well to maintain their standards for membership. They've set standards. I'll deal with it on another slide, how they've recently increased the guidelines for membership. And I think a strength is that BAPE also did a good job at lobbying for the Engineers Registration Act of 1975. That would have been driven by BAPE and I would think probably Sir Frank Hutchinson as well, because he was he was a legislator as well, and he would have had a big voice to lobby, to help lobby for the act. I think BAPE as a strength has also improved public profile of engineers over the years. By bringing the act alone did something to bolster the profession in the eyes of the public. And BAPE has been a leader in CCEO, and I'm subject to correction, but I believe we're probably the first association, the first country to have registration of engineers. And then our act was subsequently copied by and modified and adjusted by various other islands. So these are definite strengths. But there's a second slide on strengths which I want to share with you. This is more recent. The committee has adopted what they refer to as the core competencies for membership. Now, I've listed them there very quickly. So somebody applying for membership has to demonstrate an application of engineering knowledge, methods, and techniques. They have to demonstrate their use of engineering tools, equipment, and technology. Public safety and interests, engineering management and communication skills, teamwork, and last but not least, continuous professional development. This is now, increase the criteria, adding to the criteria for membership. The association does not have exams, so over the years they have increased their guidelines for membership so as to enhance the whole process. Now, if we look briefly here at the weaknesses, or what I consider the weaknesses, others may not agree, but this is just my opinion I'm sharing with you this afternoon. I think there's been limited public education on the engineer's role in society to improve the engineer's image. I think that's a weakness in my view. It's limited and it needs to be enhanced, the public education. And there's been, in my opinion, little critical analysis of public policy. I think there should be more critical analysis of public policy. Now, in a small country the size of Barbados and a small island state, it is always a challenge if you somebody there got some interference. There's always a challenge if you're too critical, because you may get ostracized in the small society that we live in. But needless to say, I think critical analysis is always should be always welcome for against any public policy. I think we need to have a weakness is that we don't have a strong enough advocacy for the building code. Now, I know we've tried to give engineer Trevor Brown 10 out of 10, and we've been lobbying, but I think we have to be stronger in trying to get the building code brought to Parliament. We are weak outreach of the application of technology for practical solutions. And I think there's limited sharing of engineers' experience, technical papers. No, I know, I admit it's a challenge at a small society with 120 members, 150 members. And engineers are not known to be, affluent writers or, but I think we need to find a way to promote sharing of engineering experiences. Now, I know some engineers I speak to think that technical papers are about new inventions or some miraculous feat. I don't agree. I think every project you do has a different experience and a different angle and a different, and that's an experience which should be documented in a technical paper and shared with the members. And that's how the younger members will learn from the experiences of the others and build on it. I think that's a weakness. We've not done enough of that in terms of promoting, BAPE. Now, okay, next slide. So what are the opportunities? What are the opportunities? I feel strongly that there's room to establish linkages with the OECS engineers. And in part of doing that, the next item listed there, tours of projects in the OECS, networking. I have worked on projects in practically every island in the East Caribbean. And there is they have challenges because their numbers are smaller than ours. So any group with such a small number, it's very difficult to activate meaningful programs. But I think BAPE should be reaching out to create linkages. There are some interesting projects in those islands. We should promote tours of these projects. I know some of us recently went on a trip to Panama. I was part of the group to tour the Panama Canal. Very interesting. But there are interesting, I mean, the Roseau Dam in St. Lucia, interesting project, and it would make a lovely site visit. I know in St. Vincent, there's the hydroelectric scheme up at Cumberland. Very interesting project. I've been and seen it. So there are projects. Now, I'm not talking about, well, there may be some buildings as well, but I'm talking about engineering in a broader context. What are, there's opportunity to network and interact with engineers in the OECS. I think that's an opportunity that's there. Technical bulletins on engineering projects to demonstrate engineering competence. Again, this is about sharing experiences and then issuing bulletins where BAP engineers can demonstrate their competence and particular specialities and so forth and so forth. Again, that's part of networking and demonstrating to the public at large the competency of the BAP members in their specific fields. Technical presentations and monthly lunch meetings. This is good for sharing and networking. We used to have, many years ago, monthly luncheons, and I recall that George Johnson was a champion of organizing those month after month for quite a few years. And it was not just a lunch meeting, but it was a chance to meet other engineers and share experiences and network. And there usually was some technical presentation, not always by an engineer, but some subject relevant to the community. And I believe that that's an opportunity we are missing. We should reactivate those programs. Now, the last one here, I think there's an opportunity to create a mandatory link with the Engineers Registration Board by offering CPD service for registered engineers. Just yesterday, I was in a meeting with members of the board where we're just finalizing the revisions to the Act. And we are definitely going to introduce the need for CPD. But I think that when Registration Act came into being, we were told that members would have to register by law, but they're not obligated to join the association. So then it became a split where some members registered and paid the fees, but wouldn't join the association. And I think that's not a good thing. But I'm just thinking here that if the revised ERB Act mandates CPD as it should, the CPD service could be provided by BAPE. In other words, you want to get your CPD points, BAP runs the scheme, you got to join BAPE so you can participate in the CPD services and get your points. And that would be an excellent way of closing that gap between the BAP members and the registered engineers, some of whom don't think they need to join BAPE. So that's something I think is an opportunity that could be pursued. Now let's talk about the threats. Now, IFI, International Financial Institutions, all IFIs, the rules for consultants' engagement, generally exclude the need for association with local firms. I think government should make it mandatory. And I think government in negotiating loans with IFIs can be more forceful in insisting that if a foreign consultant is coming to do a project here because they may have expertise that may not be here or whatever, it should be mandatory for them, each firm, submit a proposal to form an association with a local firm. I think it can be done. It's just an easy will to do it. That's a threat because, you know, I've lived through to see many consultants come in here and do projects with little or no relationships with local engineers, and there's no technology transfer, no experience transfer. Impact of AI, artificial intelligence, and technology changes, that is definitely a threat. That's going to change the landscape, in my view. And it's something that BAPE will have to, and local engineers will have to grapple with. I think I might have shared this with some of you before, but some years ago, before I left Stantec, I started getting all kinds of inquiries from firms, from practitioners out of India, offering services to prepare our drawings, technical drawings, you know, or CAD drawings. And after being badgered on several occasions, I finally took the plunge and sent a simple project to them, some sketches, and said, look, let us see what you can do, you know. And they produced the most amazing high quality drawings. And when I asked the price, I fell out of my chair because they could produce CAD drawings for me for about, I don't know, 15% of the costs that it would cost me in the office to produce CAD drawings. That's advent of technological change and so forth. And it would, I mean, technically, I could have outsourced all of my CAD drawings to this company in India, and you know, it's economically it made sense. So this is one example that we're going to keep grappling with as technology changes. And I think over the years, Stantec, in one of their acquisitions, acquired a company based in India, and they have latched onto that technology there, where, I mean, CAD technicians in India are like a dime a dozen, and they have realized that they can outsource a lot of their CAD drawings using those skill sets in India at very economical rates. So that's just one example, but I think there are others there as well. You know, what's another threat? Another threat is non-registered engineers practicing engineering. That cannot help the engineering profession. If you have non-registered engineers or people, well, they might not even be engineers, but people who are purporting to be engineers practicing, that is not a good thing. And that's why I listed it as a threat. Now, the last item here as a threat is government's failure to understand the need for the building code to set standards for durability, resilience, and sustainability. It boggles my mind when I open the papers every day and I see ministers of government and other technocrats, you know, mouthing off in the press about resilience, about sustainability, durability, the getting funds from IDB to building out resilience. And for heaven's sake, how are you going to achieve that if you don't understand the need for a building code to set a standard? I can't, it escapes my mind. I can't figure it out. It's just absolutely wrong that you could be talking about resilience and durability not understanding the need for a building code to set a minimum standard. So there are the threats. Now, what about the future? I think the association needs to energize members. When I look at the, we have 150 members, and some of them are delinquent in their membership dues, and it's really fledgling association in terms of financial operations. But so we need to offer members more so that they're attracted and want to belong and become an active part of BAPE. So that's why we need to energize members. And how are we going to do that? I think we could upgrade the Secretariat to offer members a range of services, publish monthly newsletters and an annual journal. Annual might be optimistic, but even if you did a journal every 4 years, that I think we have a skeleton secretariat now, and I believe the association needs to get to a stage where financially, where it can sustain a secretariat that's offering services for a fee to members and the public, and therefore step up their game to make it more interested, to get more engineers interested in coming on board the association. We should get engineers into key decision-making agencies in Barbados. You know, we always, cabinet and government are always appointing committees and all kinds of things. And sometimes you look and you say, where's the engineer in that crowd? He hasn't made it because we obviously are not considered. You know, we're not standing up to be counted to get elected to these decision-making bodies. That's something we need to work on in the future. Now, in conjunction with the upgrading secretariat, I think in the future we need to host technical webinars to improve engineers CPD locally and in OECS. Now, I give full credit to BAPE and Vincent Jones particularly for hosting these webinars. I think it's a fabulous move. And I think we can build on that by hosting more technical webinars to improve engineers, especially if you're going to offer a service, we're going to manage the whole CPD operation locally. We can do that at a cost. And also, I want to believe that the engineers in the OECS islands will have the same challenge. So with technology of today, we could be running webinars here so that OECS engineers can log on and share their experiences with us, and we share ours with them and do CPDs and we all benefit together. I don't think that in St. Vincent or St. Lucia or Grenada, Dominica, the small number of engineers there, I don't think they have the appetite to be setting up webinars and doing all those things. But if they want to, we could take the lead and offer that service at a cost for the OECS engineers. And the last one here is obviously going to be controversial, but BAPE as the engineer bargaining agent. Now, I watched years ago when Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, BAMP, became a trade union. And I just never thought that doctors would want to be a trade union. But it seems to have gone on well over the years, and they represent their bargaining agent for mainly the junior doctors, I believe, at the QEH and so forth. And so it asked the question, why maybe BAPE could also be a bargaining agent for engineers, and that might have a greater attraction for people to want to belong to the association. And that's, so finally, before I get your questions, I'm throwing some questions here that I would want members present to comment on. What is BAP's strategic plan for the next 10 years? Now, we may have a plan, I don't know, but I think if we don't, we should. If we're going to go forward, we have to have a strategic plan. And the other question is, as I raised earlier, how can BAP activate or energize its membership? And how can BAP have a greater impact on national decisions and development in Barbados? Gentlemen, thanks for listening. That's my presentation for this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Well, you certainly give us a lot of food for thought and a lot for discussion. So I would like to now open up the discussion to our members. And I see Tony is quick on the step. So Tony, I would invite you to unmute and you can put your camera on and engage. Right, Engineer Gibbs, right, okay. You can engage, sir.
I can't get the camera on.
In the bottom corner where you see mute and stop video.
Yeah, I see it. I've
Right.
unmuted, but the camera would not activate. I think maybe you have stopped it.
All right, I will check, but you can go ahead and answer your question. Let me
Yeah,
see what
sure.
help you here.
Well, Vincent, Andrew, first of all, Andrew gave an excellent presentation, which I enjoyed very much. But my wife also enjoyed it. She's an honorary engineer, if that's acceptable. You have a role. You have a rank in BAPE for honorary engineers.
We have honorary members and we have affiliates, so I'm sure we can fit her in. But
no honorary engineers. No, for loyal spouses. But I did some because Andrew asked me about the collapse of the Davis Cup stand, and it's connected. And I did some research into it because I did the investigation of the collapse of the Davis Cup stand. So, in my records, I can tell you of the collapse of the spectator stand during the Davis Cup tie between the West Indies. Start my video.
There you go. We can see you now, Tony.
Okay. During the West Indies and Mexico in 1971 was a tragic event which occurred at the 1st of August 1971 at the Garrison Savannah. This Davis Cup match was part of the interzonal semifinals of the Davis Cup. During this doubles match, on the second day of the tie, a temporary wooden and scaffold tube stand that had been erected to accommodate the large crowd collapsed. At the time of the collapse, the match between the Mexican pair of Mayo and Zarazuya and the West Indian team of Richard Russell, who was our #1 player in the Caribbean at the time from Jamaica, and George Rogers, was underway. The stadium was packed with enthusiastic fans, and the additional temporary stand was built to manage the overflow of spectators. The collapse occurred suddenly when the structure, unable to bear the weight and movement of the crowd, gave way. The falling debris and the crowded conditions resulted in several injuries and, tragically, the loss of lives. Reports indicated that at least 2 people were killed and dozens more were injured, some seriously. The scene was chaotic, with emergency services and spectators scrambling to assist those affected. The collapse of the stand overshadowed the sporting event, and the incident left the local community and the sporting world in shock. Although the matches were eventually completed, with Mexico advancing to the final by defeating the West Indies, the tragic deeply affected the tournament and the people involved. In response to the disaster, there was a great deal of reflection on stadium safety and the use of temporary structures for accommodating spectators in large sporting events. The collapse of the stand brought significant attention to the need for better safety standards in engineering and construction in Barbados. This tragic event served as the key impetus for the establishment of stricter regulations in the field of engineering. Specifically, it led to the enactment of the Registration Act for Engineers in Barbados in 1975, and I think that actually was proclaimed in 1976, which sought to regulate and oversee the qualifications and professional standards of engineers working in this country. This legislation was intended to ensure that construction projects, particularly those involving public safety, adhered to proper engineering principles and standards. The tragedy of the garrison was a sobering reminder of the importance of construction safety, particularly in large-scale public events. So Andrew mentioned this at the start of his talk as being a signal event in our history, and I agree with that entirely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Engineer Gibbs. Okay, so the floor is open to engage. We do have the benefit of Engineer Gibbs as well as Engineer Hutchinson here tonight. So there may be persons who may want to tease their memory or to ask them questions. Both of them have been successful engineers in Barbados and the West Indies and have, from their work, formed successful practices. So there may be some of you that have young practices that are starting. This is a good opportunity to ask some questions in that regard. But certainly I would want you to take this opportunity and engage these very noble gentlemen who have sharing their time with us this afternoon. Andrew, in terms of your interaction with the mentorship and interacting with young engineers, from the time you had your own practice when you would have started hiring young engineers to now, what are the changes that you've seen in the approach of some of our younger members, and what advice would you like to offer those younger members as they go forward in their profession?
Vincent, you got to remember, I started my practice in 1980. And I don't think, that was, I lived through the era of typing my reports on a little Remington non-electric typewriter. I lived through the era of fax machine developments. I lived through the era of emails and computer technology. So I've come from the bottom right through. And therefore, there are many, many experiences. I remember in 75, 76, I went to live in St. Lucia to oversee the construction of 6 bridges on the East Coast Highway. 3 were designed by CEP and 3 were designed by Caribbean Consulting Engineers, which I was part of that group. But I say that because it was a one-man band, and I had a little portable Remington typewriter, and I would type my reports with little carbon paper. That was, so I come from that era. And the big, and I mentioned this at an earlier presentation, the advent of computers and the introduction of computers into my practice for doing CAD and so was a quantum leap, because you had to train the staff and it had a lot of downtime. All that had a dollar value attached to it. So you're trying to introduce a new technology, but it's going to cost you to get it started. And that was a challenge. But I think I found people with the advent of computer technology, too many engineers depend on the computer almost as if it's God. I've seen, young engineers coming out of university now. Most of them are proficient in CAD and all the technology, but to do a design, they can't sketch, they can't draw anything. To do anything, they have to turn on the computer first. And I think that is that's a retrograde step in my view. You must have relate to your designs. I'm talking as a civil structural engineer. I do my designs by doing overlays with a felt pen, and I, construct the layout of the structure over the architectural drawing, and that's how I do my conceptual thinking. But I found over the years that engineers now are so hooked on computer technology that they don't think like that. They have to turn on the computer to draw the slightest thing. They can't sketch. I think that's, in my opinion, a downside of using computer technology. But you asked me about young engineers. Yeah. Several have been through my office. I won't call all the names, but they would know who they are. Some of them are out there. I think consulting engineering is more than doing a design and producing a drawing. And this is not readily understood by graduates, young engineers. And they don't, you're not taught that at university. So you come into a practice and there's a lot to be learned about, project management, quality control during inspections in the field, about doing management of the project in terms of engineers' instructions and issuing revised drawings and issuing sketches, and that whole process, running site meetings and so forth. And then the whole financing of a consulting business, understanding the financial factors that makes it work. But I think, well, I guess we'll have to learn. I've tried to impart knowledge over the years, and I think I've done it to a few of them, but there's more to be learned.
All right, thanks for that, Andrew. Remember, guys, the floor is open to questions. Engineer Gibbs, I do want to engage you on something that Andrew did say earlier, and that is about how do we get engineers basically a seat at the board table, the decision-making table, to sit amongst the other decision makers who tend to be mostly lawyers, accountants, and doctors in Barbados. What are your views on this?
Well, that's a point of weakness in my case, because I'm not a politician at all. But Barbados is particularly difficult in this because Barbados believes, the society in Barbados believes that a 21st century country can be run by lawyers. If we had the same percentage of lawyers in Barbados, percentage related to the population, as they have in India, not in India, in Japan. Let's take a really advanced country, Japan. If we had the same percentage in Barbados as they have in Japan, Barbados would have 18 lawyers, 18 total, but we have over 1,000. So we have to find things for them to do. I don't know whether it's commonly known, but the only profession in Barbados allowed by law to have a scale of fees is a legal profession. It is illegal for doctors, accountants, architects, engineers, land surveyors to have a scale of fees. Illegal. Only lawyers are allowed to have a scale of fees. So I don't know how we will get into the situation in Barbados. It's a very much easier in Trinidad, I can tell you. Very much easier.
Yeah,
I can't give you a good answer to your question. I'm very sorry, Vincent.
Well, thank you for offering a comment. We do want to take advantage of this situation. Sorry, Bruce, you have a question. Please do go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent, and thanks, guys. I know last week when we had this session with Jimmy Clark, a point came up about weaknesses of engineers in the field of financial, let's say accounting or financial intelligence to show return on investments on different projects, etc. And we said that was one weakness of engineers, and Engineer Hutchinson also mentioned another one where they can't sketch, and then there's also a weakness where some engineers can't present. Maybe the BAPE can act as a body to bridge those gaps. Is it possible we give some sort of service or some sort of qualifications where we teach engineers these courses and they get that credited to their resume?
The sky is the limit, Bruce. Once we have persons who are willing to help put their hand to the plow. But certainly, I do like the ideals that you've mentioned, and they were echoed by Andrew earlier as being a conduit, as it were, for not only engineers here, but certainly in the OECS. So if we can offer services for sale, as it were, where the association benefits, but also the members benefit by having credible outcomes, then yeah, these are things that we can certainly, I would like to look at going forward in the future.
Vincent,
yes, sir.
Comment on that. Bruce's comment is a good comment, but again, like I mentioned in my presentation, BAPE could act as a catalyst to provide a forum and which will hopefully encourage engineers to practice their presentation skills. He's absolutely correct. I know quite a few engineers, won't call any names, who are very competent technically. But if I ask them to go to a board to make a presentation, they can't handle it. They can do all the numbers and all the things. If you ask them to package their findings and present it to a board, they're in trouble. They can't handle it. So BAPE could act as a catalyst in providing opportunities, for people to make presentations. You only get better at presenting by practicing. You don't get better by reading about it. You got to practice it. So I think he's right. It's a good point. Now, while we're here, some years ago, I had the audacity to visit the BIDC and suggest that what I saw was an opportunity for Barbadian engineers to market their skills in the OECS. If you look at the number of engineers in Barbados, it's remarkably more than you will find in any of the islands of the OECS. So we have a resource here of expertise, which we're not marketing. How do we market it? I suggested to BIDC, if the government could use the model used by CEDA, Canadian International Development Agency, years ago, where they voted a budget, I don't know, $2 million a year or whatever, and engineers locally, consultants locally would have an incentive to go into the islands and look for projects and identify projects, and then your fees will be funded by this fund. It would create CEDA did it well. The engineers who designed the British Tongue Fisheries Harbour, that's how that started. They came down here and they did a study, and then they went back, and CEDA bought the idea.
British Tongue Fishing Harbour.
Yeah. So we have a resource in Barbados that we could be using if there was an incentive for local engineers to go into the OECS islands and look for projects and put together the project and make a submission. Yeah, that's good. We fund that. Let's go. And it creates avenues for us to go. Now, where you know, if a Bajan engineer goes into the islands, when it goes to construction, it may also give the local contractors a heads up on it to go forward. So that is something that I felt, but IDC obviously didn't understand it and they scoffed at it. And it went nowhere, but it's just a thought, a creative thought.
Problem was, Andrew, that it was an engineer making the suggestion, not a lawyer. So I guess that's where the problem came. Trevor, Colonel Brown, since you see things from a regional point of view, given your other hat that you wear, do you want to make any comment in regard to what Andrew would have just mentioned or offer a perspective on it?
Hi, Vincent. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm on the road actually. So
my apologies.
Okay, I've just been following.
All right, no problem. Tony, what are your thoughts on what Andrew just said? I mean, you've also worked throughout the islands. Your firm has done work throughout the islands. What are your thoughts in that regard, sir?
I'm trying to unmute. Okay. Well, I was a West Indian before I was a Grenadian. I've lived in 6 Caribbean islands. I went to school in 4 of them, 10 schools before I went to university. So I feel very comfortable speaking about regional issues. And indeed, when I was in charge of my office in Barbados, at one stage we were getting 50% of our income from the adjacent islands. But in doing that, we tried also to involve engineers from those islands. So at what we would have actually working in the Barbados office, engineers from Trinidad, Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and Guyana, which is not an island, but it's part of the Caribbean anyway. And there's a lot of benefit from this cross-fertilization within the Caribbean. I think is because for some strange reason, which I really don't understand, we have become more insular than we used to be. I think possibly it's come about because we have become independent countries, whereas if you go prior to 1982, prior to 1962, we were all part of the British Empire. And now we are 17 independent countries in the Commonwealth Caribbean. And that has made it more difficult for us to move around. Although the law makes it easier for us to move around. We have officially freedom of movement within CARICOM. But I personally have never had difficulty working in adjacent places. There are different technical problems to be solved, different materials to work with, and all of this is beneficial not only to the countries we go to, but even we bring back the benefits to Barbados, both in financial terms and in technical knowledge terms. I don't know whether I've dealt with your question, Vincent.
Thank you for that. And I want to pose a question to both yourself and Drew. And I'm also going to ask Joan to chime in here from to offer a different perspective from the electrical side. In terms of having regulations across this region which will permit engineers to be able to work throughout the region as engineers in practice, i.e. if you register in Barbados that you'll be able to go to work in Jamaica or one of the other islands, or if it could be an agreement with the OECS. What are the stumbling blocks? I would say Tony and Andrew from the civils and structural side, and then Joan from the electrical side. What are the stumbling blocks for that to be achieved and realized?
That's a very good question, Vincent. I have to confess and tell you that for all the years I've worked in the OECS, I never ever once had a work permit or applied for a work permit. I just used to turn up. I mean, when the immigration asked me what I was there for, I was there for a meeting. And he said, "Is it business?" I said, "It may be, I don't know." So I never gave a definitive answer that would suggest I was on business. And I picked up projects in most of the OECS islands, private sector projects. There are a few government projects. So I've moved freely through the OECS islands. People said, well, you can't do that. That's not allowed. Well, I have news for you. I did it. And there was a time when I used to go into St. Vincent so frequently because quite a few projects were in St. Vincent. The immigration officer looked at me and said, I thought you were a Vincentian. So you can, if you overthink it and go through all the formalities, you would spend all day filling out forms trying to figure out how to get visas and whatever, work permits. I said, I don't have time for that. I'm just going to do it. I just turned up and I did it. So I don't know if that works for everybody, but it worked for me. But the biggest stumbling block, there are a number of stumbling blocks. One is if you do a project in an island, and they're now withholding tax regulations. So if a client in that island, private or public, wants to hire you, the law will require them to do a withholding tax. You're not paying taxes there, you're doing work, so you got to get a piece of the pie. And that withholding tax is, in some cases, has 15%, which is quite high in a big part of your fee. And very often it's difficult, even if you paid it, it's difficult to get a receipt so you can show in your tax return locally that I paid tax on this already, and there's no rebate system. And that's a stumbling block that I overcame by registering a company in the OECS. So once you're doing a project in the OECS, okay, this is put the money there. It's within the OECS, and the same withholding tax doesn't apply. If you step outside the OECS, then the withholding tax applies.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. But
the withholding tax has been as much as 25% in my experience.
Wow.
Right.
In Antigua, 25%.
Oh, I didn't do much in Antigua. I couldn't take
on. Which is a lot more than your profit.
Correct. So, but Vincent, the thing which we are now challenged with, I know the CARICOM governments, or CARICOM, CrossQ, are all grappling with the normalization and standardization of registration within the islands. I sit on a CrossQ committee and spent enormous amount of hours going through all this stuff. And I said to them, this is not going to work. You're trying to normalize registration in 13 islands that are each independent states. Each have their own laws, each have their own regulations. How in the name of heavens you're going to get 13 Caribbean countries to sign off on a common registration process for engineers? It's never going to happen. But there are technocrats. None of the people on the committee I was on are practicing engineers. They're all bureaucrats who are engineers, but bureaucrats. And so they don't understand the practicality of what they're dealing with. And they're generating paper with all kinds of things in it, which is just nonsense, in my view. And that's a major challenge because, and there's also the work permit. There's a difference between being registered as an engineer in that island and being, again, a work permit. Mere registration does not guarantee you a work permit. A work permit is a separate kettle of fish. But so there are the challenges I've encountered over my 50 years of practice and working in the islands for about 40 of those 50 years. And it's still being done. I mean, I saw some document recently where some CARICOM committee met and said, we're going to normalize engineers. So if you register once, you can practice in any island. It's not going to happen. The registration standards for Barbados requires 4 years practical experience. St. Lucia has gone now, from my recollection, to 2 years. And the people in some of the other islands are saying, well, that is too long. Why do you need that for? And Jamaica used to be 4 years, but recently there's split there, and then some sections are saying you only need 2 years. So you know, there's no normalization of registration standards, and I don't think it will ever be achieved, personally.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you.
In addition to that,
Tony?
you can
Yeah.
be registered in Barbados and not be able to be registered in Trinidad because Barbados accepts the Bachelor of Science degree from UWI Trinidad as being an acceptable academic standard. The Board of Engineering in Trinidad and Tobago does not accept the BSc from St. Augustine, Trinidad, as being adequate. You have to have more than that. You have to have a master's before you can be registered in Trinidad. So, and Andrew is correct. Jamaica is 2 years. Jamaica is 2, so you can be registered in Jamaica, and you can't be registered in Barbados. You can be registered in Barbados, and you can't be registered in Trinidad.
Wow. So Tony, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, you've been, as we would like to say, you've been around town long. So
well, I'm like Andrew. I ignore all of the laws. And I just go to the country and do the work.
Correct. Correct.
Yes.
all right. Thank you, gentlemen. Joan, can you offer us comment as it pertains to the electrical side of things?
Yes, well, in terms of, say, the legal, the work permits, the taxes, all the humbugs that Andrew and Tony spoke to before, paperwork, political, social, all of those barriers, they definitely exist. And it's the same for electrical as for anybody else. But in terms of the technical standards, they're different. Yes, they will have the British and they'll be talking English. They'll be talking in terms of, say, English as opposed to inches as opposed to millimeters, and Canadian and French. But in my opinion, using one or the other one really blow up a building because they're very close and the engineers can get to study and work in whichever standard the country is using. That's not really a barrier. In fact, there's harmonization of a few of the international standards, especially in power quality, where it started out. And so we can get it to work, but I think it is these outside, these external barriers that are preventing us from going, out and abroad to work. But technically, I don't see it being a challenge electrically.
Okay. Bruce, obviously you're not gonna come at you from the mechanical side, and you have the distinct honor of being Trinidadian working in Barbados. So you would have experienced a bit of what both Tony and Andrew spoke about. Can you share your experience and tell us what your thoughts are?
Well, just to correct you, Vincent, I'm electrical, not mechanical.
Right.
But there were challenges. I mean, I was in Barbados for about 4 months before I could legally work. So I worked in Barbados for 4 months before I could legally work here. Couldn't get a bank account. And then I was registered as CSME national, which is, as you know, you should be able to work in the entire CARICOM. But that title is only valid for Barbados. You can't go to St. Vincent and say, well, look, I have CSME status here, but it's like, no, that's just for Barbados. So you would have to re-register there again and again and again. And as they said, the qualifications required to become a registered engineer are all different. So there's that. 1, to be qualified as an engineer. 2, to be able to work. 3, to be able to open a bank account. And then, I mean, it's a lot of hoops.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks for that, Bruce. Andrew and Tony, in terms of setting up an engineering practice, what advice would you have for the engineers in this meeting this evening who are either starting out afresh in terms of their practice or looking to set up an engineering practice in the near future? What advice or nuggets of advice would you gentlemen like to offer them? So Tony, I'll start with you and then we'll come back to Andrew.
No, I think you should start with Andrew.
Very well, sir.
I joined an existing practice. Andrew started a new one.
Okay, so Andrew, let's start with you then.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, Vincent. In I came back to Barbados to work for Miles Rothwell for about a year, and good experience, good structural, good heavy dose of structural engineering. Then I joined Wallace Evans, which eventually became DLN. And I worked there for close to 10 years. Then I decided to fly the coop and put up my own shingle. But I left DLN and joined the Bridgetown Sewers project. That was a good filler, a gap filler. Because to come out of a consulting firm and just open a shop is a quantum leap. So I was engaged as the project engineer in the project execution unit to oversee the entire construction of the Bridgetown Sewers project, which was extremely interesting. I mean, the sewage plant, 2.5 million gallons a day, the outfall, the sewers, that was so much. And, I had just done my master's in sanitary engineering, and that was a natural fit. So after that, I transitioned into consulting. Created Associated Consulting Engineers. Several people pulled me aside and asked me if I knew what I was doing, because up to that point in time, all the consulting engineering firms locally were expats or were funded by expats. You got CEP, you got, Wallace Evans came here, and they said, but you must be crazy. Who's going to give you a project? I said, well, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. So I took a leap of faith, so to speak. But I could only do that leap of faith because my family said, go for it. If there's a pit, I will help you out. If there's a gap, I will help you out. So I took that leap of faith to open a consulting practice in 1980. And I quickly learned that there was a cartel of architects that control building projects. And I'm the new boy on the block. Well, I couldn't even get looking at the cartel, and I'm a new boy on the block. Who's this guy, So I then said, okay, I got to make my own road. So I started offering a total package of design, project management, full service in one shop for industrial projects. Things like Roberts Feed Plant, things like Collins Pharmaceutical at Warren, things like Blades and Williams workshops, right? I decided to make a pitch to those clients, and I discovered that I was successful. Now, I could only do that because building my career, I had a very rounded experience. Civil engineering, a lot of structural engineering when I worked for Miles. And when I worked for what was DLN by Wallace Evans, and I learned about contracts and contract procedures, So I had a rounded experience. So I decided to offer clients a total package. Only deal with me. In fact, there are several projects where I even did the architecture. I had to make my road in the community, in the engineering fraternity. And you know what? After I was about 2 or 3 years into it, I noticed the architects started giving me a call. I was then being invited to come into the cartel. But that's how I built my practice, by cut and thrust and working away through it to find out how to get in. You couldn't go to government because government would say, "What's your prior track record?" Well, I don't have. I just formed a new company. I don't have a track record.
Mm-hmm.
So bye. Don't worry. So I literally built my road into the marketplace, built a road in the marketplace in primarily industrial projects, where I could do the design, architecture, do the planning permit, do the construction drawings, prepare the contract. I manage it. But that skill set, which I had acquired over 10 years prior, is not normal. Most people coming out of university try to pigeonhole themselves. I can do structural engineering, I can do this, I can do that. And there seem to be little interest in what's going on around them. I didn't do that. I quickly realized when I left UE that there was more structural engineering in town than anything else. So if I was going to be in the business, I need to be able to be comfortable doing structural engineering, right? That's the first benchmark. But that basically is how I got started, with a leap of faith, and then I had to make my roads into the building fraternity, how I explained earlier.
Okay. Tony, you have a slightly different perspective, obviously, because you came into a existing practice, but I believe you would have become a senior partner over time. So can you give us your perspective?
Well, to be successful in consulting engineering, I felt that the first ingredient is to work hard, is to be willing to work very hard, and unfortunately, that has made me into a workaholic. So I have that disease now. I have that, and tomorrow I'll be 87 years old, and I'm still working, and that's a real problem. That's a real problem.
Sorry,
But,
Tony, you say you'll be how old tomorrow?
87.
Well, we want to congratulate you on such a milestone.
So I arrived in Barbados. I arrived in Barbados at the age of 28. So the fifth. That's what 59 years ago. 1st of November 1928. And
58.
1968. 1965 I arrived here. 1st of November 1965. To replace Miles Rothwell in the firm that I joined. And Miles Rothwell, he met me and he went to see a quantity surveyor called Bill Kaufman, who a few years later became friendly with me and told me that the day that Miles met me, he rushed down to see me and told me, he said, "Bill, I just met my successor, he won't last 6 months."
Wow.
So I had a rough time to start, I can tell you. The only way I succeeded in the early years was to work slightly longer hours than other people and do slightly better work than other people. And to build up the firm, what I decided is I would not hire any engineer who was not better than me. So if you want to build a good practice, you should only hire people who are better than yourself.
Mm-hmm. Very good, Tony. Very good. Very good. All right. Any questions for these two august gentlemen? Anybody wants to get some, as I said, some nuggets of advice? This is the time. Ray, I know you recently, well, not so recently anymore, but I know you branched out onto your own practice. Is there anything that you want to tease out from these goodly gentlemen?
Well, I think that they've shared a lot that I have gathered so far. So not right now, but I have their numbers. So if anything comes up, I'll bother them. Probably not bother Tony tomorrow on his birthday, but I'll definitely give them a ring if something comes up.
See, the difference in that you can get it free. If you call them tomorrow, you may go pay.
That is true. That's true.
Bruce, I see you have your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I know you guys mentioned, Engineer Hutchinson, you mentioned that you had experience with contracts and all these different areas. Now, I just started last year. I can't speak about that, but I would have bid on some contracts, on some jobs, etc. And when you get them, you realize, well, in my proposal, I missed this, and maybe I should have had a disclaimer for this item. It's a lot of things you learn that you miss, that you need to improve on, and maybe the BAPE may be a good resource for lessons learned in these things, or a resource for maybe assisting with contracts that you may do, or something like that. Something as simple as I said, a disclaimer I missed. The amount of times people can recall you to to do a design for them. It's something I missed as well. And it may seem simple to you seasoned gentlemen, but you know, it was foreign to me. So
Yeah.
you guys have a library of lessons learned that you want to share with us?
Well, Vincent, that is
Exactly what you were saying earlier about having
Bruce's.
those interactions. Yeah.
Yeah. This is BAPE should promote more networking. You know, I am happy to have one-on-ones with Bruce or any others and share my experiences. You know, I tell you, one of the things I learned when I did the bridge, when I was a sub consultant to the Bridgetown fishery, the consultants for the fisheries project in Bridgetown, the Stevenson Lucan at the time. I learned so much by working with Charlie Stevenson. I was fairly new in the business, and he taught me the art of working out fees based on manpower resources. Up until then, most engineers in Barbados would have a percentage scale, you know, that was 2%, 3%, 4%. I put a number out of a hat. But I got to realize that, well, that's not very scientific. You need to figure out your costs so you can monitor it to see when you finish if you made money. And then Charlie Stevenson had this marvelous spreadsheet that showed me how to do that. And I went away, took the idea and fashioned my own spreadsheet, which to this day, I still use it, where it has the columns for each resource person and their charge rates, and down the left is the activities by stage of the project, and you know, and I go through and estimate the man-hour components for doing each aspect of the project, and I come up to a fee, a number. No, I had one of my first clients was Chafet, and when I sent Mr. Hallow my fee on a percentage basis, he called me back and said, Andrew, I don't understand this. I don't deal in percentages. I want a number. Right away, he forced me to conceive a methodology for estimating my services based on man hours and saying, okay, I'll do it for $10,000 or $50,000, right? So, and that was one of my very first experiences. And then Charlie Stevenson came along with his spreadsheet, and I learned from it. And I have to tell you, to this day, the spreadsheets I generated, and Stantec still use them in the local office. We have a spreadsheet for estimating all of our services. It works. It works. Now, I'm quite happy to share that methodology. It's not a secret. I'm quite happy to share that methodology with other consultants who are trying to get into business. I don't consider it to be a secret.
So the wise engineers listening, I think both Andrew and Tony's lunchtime schedule will be filled up for the next couple months of invitations to lunch. But who am I to say how one should go about these things professionally? But on serious terms, though, I mean, this is what business is. This is what people do. If you want to get ideas, bounce ideas, have conversations, ask advice, you normally would invite a senior to lunch. And, you know, if they so agree, that is your opportunity to impress upon them or ask upon them certain things. So I think, Andrew, to your point, it is something that we need to move more toward in mentoring our younger engineers or those engineers who are now starting out in business who may want a bit of advice. And to you gentlemen who are on that part of the scale, that's how you do it. You call up one of these gentlemen and say, Andrew, do you have time that I can take you to lunch next? Or when would you have an opportunity I can take you to lunch? And, you know, Tony is to the age now that he doesn't go anywhere without his wife. So you have to take Tony and his wife to lunch. So just remember that. That's the way to do it, guys. That's the way to do it. And, you know, if Tony and Andrew know that they got 5 free lunches coming up, it kind of saves on the supermarket bill as well. So just consider that going forward, guys.
Yeah.
Tony, want to offer any comments before we close off tonight? And then Andrew will give you the last say.
No, the interesting thing about the spreadsheet is what happens at the end of a project, a large project. If you ask if you ask somebody in the office who doesn't have the spreadsheet on his desk, how many man years a particular project take, you cannot guess a good answer. You cannot guess a correct answer. Let me give you an example. The example I give you is the Central Bank of Barbados project. Okay, a big project. And when we finished the project, I knew exactly how many man years of technical time it took. The technical time being all the man years of engineers and technicians who worked on the project, because our timesheets were consolidated. Okay, we used to use Light and Power to do our timesheets, actually, to consolidate our timesheets. So I asked an engineer, a senior engineer and a senior draftsman who had worked throughout the project. The draftsman guessed that we spent 3 man years on the project. The engineer said 8 man years, and the correct answer was 22 man years.
Wow.
The point I'm making is that you can't guess this kind of work. You actually have to measure it, and you measure it by filling in timesheets every month.
Correct.
Yeah. And this touches on time and motion studies.
The other thing is, I never used the timesheets to determine how much effort I was going to put in the next month or the next year on a project. You charge a fee that you think you can do the job for, and having determined that fee, you can't think of it as being a maximum amount of effort you're going to put into the project. You put into the project what the project requires.
Right.
Not what the budget allows you to do. And you hope that you have estimated your future use, your future requirements for the project reasonably accurately, so you don't make a loss. And you use the information from the previous projects to hone your skills in estimating the next project. So timesheets are important. After I resigned as a director of CEP, which was 28 and a half years ago, I continue to fill in timesheets because I continue to do engineering. I ceased to be a director, but I did not cease to be an engineer.
Tony, thank you so much for that. Those comments of wisdom. Andrew, as you were the person that would have done the presentation this evening, I want to give you the opportunity to have closing comments, please.
Yeah, I would just, having built a consulting business from nothing, I think many engineers don't probably appreciate, you could be a smart engineer, but you're not necessarily going to be a smart business engineer. And I learned my business skills by trial and error. And I tell you, from day one, I had a timesheet system because I'd seen Charlie Stevenson at work, and I said, this is the way to go. And I had a timesheet system manually filled out, and the numbers would be put onto the Excel spreadsheet for each project. So you could track the costs where you were on each project. And then I could use that database to estimate costs required for doing a new project. And it would be design time, it would be site inspection time, it would be site meetings time, it would be preparing drawings. I can tell you how many hours I allow per drawing, you know. But that was after I built up a database that would allow you to use that database to estimate going forward. And that's the business part of engineering that you're not taught. I learned that in trying to make the business work in trial and error. And I mean, when I teamed up with Stantec. I discovered Stantec had the exact same philosophy. Their entire operation is, you know, timesheets are filled out every Friday evening before you go home. You have to fill out timesheets electronically, and it's all posted with each project. And by Monday morning, you could look at each project and see the financial status of each project. It was current, always current at the end of the week. And that, I mean, Stantec, big operation, annual revenue about 6 billion US. And you can readily appreciate that if they did not track timesheets, they could be out millions and not realize it. So you had to track time because you're selling time and the cost of time is important. So I know some of my architectural colleagues that I work with, when I told them that I do these timesheets, they said, "You gotta be crazy. I ain't got time for timesheets. That's too much work." And most of them just pluck percentages out of things and say, "I can do it 6%, or the architectural fee is 6, 7%, or whatever." But they were not tracking costs. They didn't do it. They were making money. They were just stabbing in the dark. Because timesheet, and as Tony said, I agree with Tony. You got to fill out timesheets because that's the only way you can track your costs to know whether you're making sense and making the business is viable. Thanks again, Vincent. It was very interesting. I enjoyed presenting and interacting with the members.
Well, thank you, Tony, for coming in at the end and offering your vast knowledge and wisdom. And Andrew, of course, thank you for putting together the presentation, and likewise offering of yourself and tonight's presentation. So Ray, I know you have some computer qualifications there, so perhaps you can write a program that does some of this stuff and sell it to engineers locally and regionally. So that's something you can consider. I don't know when you'll find the time to do it, but there you go. And I know Trevor obviously was very good at doing programming and so on, but Trevor is so busy now. He won't have a time to do that right now, but you never know. You never know. The kernel is manufactured time, I feel. But gentlemen, I really want to thank you for sharing this evening with us. And we will definitely seek to create opportunities where we can have forums where you gentlemen that have so much to share can do that with some of the younger members and help with that knowledge transfer that you spoke about, Andrew, because that's very important in terms of continuity, but also in preventing persons perhaps from making mistakes because they are genuinely ignorant of certain things. So those are things, some homework basically for us to do as an association going forward. I just want to remind our membership that we do have some other events coming up this week in our 60th anniversary. Tomorrow, we have the tour of the Barbados Light and Power Clean Energy Bridge. That takes place at the Trent's facility for 3 p.m. So for those of you who will be coming, please bring your PPE, hard shoes, high-vis vest if you have it, and a helmet. And you want to be there for 3 p.m. at the Trent's facility. Joan, is there anything else you want to remind us about in that particular visit? Is there anything else that Light and Power requests for that?
No, the first part of the tour, which would be the battery at the solar plant, we would be in a coach. And when we finish that, we will be going to the new medium speed diesel plant, and that will be a walkthrough. So for that, it will be critical then to have your gear, safety shoes, as you said, PPE, high visibility vests. Some are available at Light and Power that they can loan you. So if you don't have, you'll be given some. But as many people that have it, it would be good to bring them in case they don't have enough.
Thanks for that, John. So that's a 3 p.m. sharp start. We do know where St. Lucie is, so obviously plan your time accordingly or request your time accordingly so you can make your way to the north to get there for the start. There's going to be a safety briefing, and then as Joan said, we set off, I think, on some sort of bus or van collectively then to go and do the tour. After that, we are looking to have a social at a place. Kenton, I don't know if you have the flyer there you can put up, but we do have a social plan for a restaurant on the West Coast by the name of Juma's. We would have circulated some information, but we will circulate it again before tomorrow via the various platforms and email. And the intention is that persons, even if you were unable to make the tour because of work commitments, you are invited to come down just for a light beverage and to have some conversation with your peers, which is important to get to know who people are, what they were doing, who they work with, what services they offer. So for those of you who can make that social tomorrow night, Joan, can you give us a bit of detail on that again, please?
Yes, it's at Juma's, which is 2 buildings north of the Lone Star Garage. The parking for that facility, though, is directly opposite the Lone Star Garage. You'll see there are 2 parking lots there. The very first one is the parking lot for Lone Star, so don't go there. Drive right past it, and you'll find the parking lot for Juma's, and it's labeled. So
And
you
is
would
it-
park there and then cross the road, walk across the road, and walk
And-
2 buildings north.
All right, Joni, thank you for that. And see, Joni gave some real Bayesian directions there. She identified the car park and then tell you, don't go to that one, go to the next one. But at least there was no Bronco involved, so that was good. So thanks for that, Joe. And then we have our premier event for the celebration week, which is going to be our dinner on Saturday night at 7. We will be starting cocktails at 6:15. And this is going to be at the Wyndham Sam Lawrence Castle. We do have the honor this year of hosting Her Excellency the President, who has graciously agreed to sit with us on that evening for dinner. And we will be having former Chief Justice Sir Patterson Cheltenham as our guest speaker. And we will be elevating, I believe it's 5 fellows this year. There will be some honorary, I think 2 persons inducted as honorary members, and then the engineering project of the year. So there's a good opportunity to scrub up and come out looking nice, fresh, and clean. I know we're accustomed seeing each other in our jeans and in our helmets and our high-vis vests, but it is the one opportunity as engineers that we do get to show a bit of polish. So come out with in your glad rags, your best attire, and let's make an evening of it as we celebrate each other and celebrate the achievement of our colleagues who are ascending to the fellowship category. So we really are looking forward to a great couple of days ahead. Of course, this is the 60th anniversary, so there may be other events outside of this week, but these are the events that we've put together for this week in particular. So we're really looking forward to you coming out, those of you who can, and participating and sharing with us in these events. We would have started a week earlier with a church service at St. George's Parish Church. And we are now, this is our 2nd event for the week, and tomorrow will be the 3rd and 4th, respectively, moving nicely on to the dinner. So we look forward to seeing some of you there at these events. We do have another technical presentation this month. This is going to be in and around asphalt, being presented by Asphalt Producers, and you will get some information coming out on that after this week of activities. And we pretty much have hammered down, I believe, some presentations right through to November going into December. So there are still some opportunities this year to accrue some CPD points for your professional organization. So just keep an eye out for the flyers and so on when they come out, and just register for the events that will be upcoming. I want to thank everyone who participated this evening. A special thanks to Engineering Fellow Andrew Hutchinson and Engineering Fellow Tony Gibbs for imparting and sharing with us this evening. Thank you so much, and I bid you a good evening.